Hello and welcome to the Of Interest podcast. Thank you for listening and or watching. We're joined today by Julie Anne Genter from the Green Party, which has a long list of portfolios, so I won't list them all, but the most relevant one for us is finance. Thank you so much for coming on.
Kia ora.
First of all, congratulations. The Green Party is on track for, I think, its biggest win in history, with upwards of 15, maybe 16 seats.
That would be great. I would love to see that. We can't count our votes till the election finishes, and the specials come in, so we will see. But I think it's going to be really good.
Why do you think that is? What is propelling you towards your biggest win to date?
I think in part it's because people are much more aware of climate change and environmental issues and of how the inequality in our society is exacerbated by our tax system, and they're looking for the evidence-based and visionary policies that the Green Party is putting forward.
And that message is getting through?
Finally. I think they're looking because, unfortunately, we haven't had enough action on inequality or climate change in the last 3 years, and I think people are dissatisfied with that and want to see bolder action.
I think your leader said in a debate the other night that your party is one of the only ones that has come out of a coalition more popular than it went in. Do you think they also see you as like a competent, stable coalition partner? Yeah,
I think that is true, and it took us being in government in order to prove that. I was surprised when I first came to New Zealand almost 20 years ago that the Greens weren't already a major party, because I've looked at the policy and I was like, this is mainstream policy in many countries overseas. And that's, I guess, what motivated me to join the Greens and help campaign for them.
Despite a pretty strong showing from the Greens, you're likely to be an opposition party.
It's not
a foregone conclusion.
No, I think you can't read too much into the polls because there's a huge percentage of undecideds still. And if those undecideds break for Labour and Green, then it will be very close. And I think that's entirely possible, that people who are sure they want to go right have already decided. And then there's a big group of people who are still making up their mind. Not to mention the fact that polls are a relatively small sample size. But I think the main statistical error is reporting them as though the percentages are out of 100 when that's just the decided voters. Okay. And so the final week of the campaign, if people turn out, if they vote, it will absolutely change the outcome of the election.
So you still think it's winnable?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And also the data that we have from door knocking. I mean, we're running our biggest ground campaign ever in Rongotai and Wellington Central. And we are still talking to undecided voters who are definitely going to vote, and they're deciding between Labour and Green. So.
Have you sensed people being less engaged this election?
Not in Wellington.
Not in Wellington.
Now, that may be true elsewhere. I do think that people are feeling demoralized because they aren't seeing a positive vision coming from the two larger parties. But I think the Greens campaign can make a positive difference, and hopefully that will be enough to help people know it's worth voting.
You are the finance spokesperson, but you also hold the transport portfolio, and you've been the associate minister. Labour have proposed some astronomically expensive transport projects, particularly in Auckland, tunnelled light rail, a multi-tunnel harbour crossing. Why are they going for these expensive options when there are cheaper available?
Well, I think, firstly, it's not just about cheaper. I mean, I would say there's much better options available. Okay. Their surface light rail, which was the original proposal that the Greens campaigned on and then Labour picked up back in 2016, from, central Auckland through Mount Roskill down to Mangere, hubbing at the airport. It just makes sense. And, we've seen 3 surface light rail systems rolled out in Australian cities and been extremely popular and successful in Sydney, Canberra, and Gold Coast, not to mention hundreds of cities, in North America and Europe and elsewhere. So that's the option. I mean, we could deliver surface light rail in Auckland, Wellington, and Christchurch as the kind of spine of an improved public transport system that connects with bikes and buses and everything else. We can do that for less than the cost of the tunnelled light rail line in Auckland, and we can do it faster with less disruption and make a bigger difference to people. So that's what the Greens are campaigning on, and a very good reason for people to party vote Green.
Has it been frustrating, though, to watch Labour pursue these sort of arguably overly ambitious policies, unable to deliver them? Has that been a frustration for you?
I think Labour would have had the opportunity to make better decisions if the Greens had been in a coalition government this past 3 years. And the fact that they didn't need to work with us obviously didn't help them. So, maybe they'll learn their lesson from that. I'm not sure. But yeah, it is slightly frustrating to me that the transport debate seems to have gone quite backwards amongst the other parties like National Act and to some extent Labour, because they're competing to see who can spend more on projects that are not going to make it easier to move around New Zealand, particularly not with less carbon emissions, at a time when we need it more than ever. And I guess the other frustrating part to me is that what's good for the environment and the climate in this case is also more fiscally responsible. And the parties who claim to be fiscally responsible and say there's no magic money tree are promising projects that just don't stack up because the perception is they're popular. But in truth, there was a poll, a Guardian Essentials poll, maybe a month or two ago, that showed. They asked people the question, what should be the priority for new transport investment, roads or public transport, rail and coastal shipping? And 72% of New Zealanders chose the latter.
Really?
Public transport, rail and coastal shipping, which makes sense because if you invest in those things, that makes the roads you already have work much better. So I don't believe that New Zealanders don't want this. I just think that the two larger parties are stuck in a sort of race to the bottom to promise things for people who either are involved in delivering these large highway projects or large tunneling projects, or people who I think they assume that because everyone drives, that's what they just want more roads, whereas lots of people would like the option to not drive everywhere.
They're just choosing the best option and the roads have been built.
Yeah. And if you keep throwing lots of money at a few more, you're not really going to give them the option to do something better.
In Wellington, there is a Green mayor, but in Auckland, you have a slightly unlikely ally in Wayne Brown, who wants a lot of the things the Green Party does, surface light rail, congestion charging. You already have a few mayoral candidates on your list, but could we see Wayne Brown on the 2026 Green Party list?
I wouldn't go that far. I think that my colleague Chloe Swarbrick, MP for Auckland Central, has had to be involved in some campaigns to, stop cuts to the Auckland City budget. But I do think it's great that Wayne Brown is on side with surface light rail, and I would say it's because he's someone who looks at the numbers. And I'm really glad that he's not, that he's willing to be evidence-based about what's going to be the best use of money and get the best outcomes. And I think that is an unexpected ally for me, yes.
Yeah, I was thinking, sometimes people accuse the Greens of being a little bit pie-in-the-sky thinking, but it's interesting to have two pragmatists from different sides agreeing. That sort of suggests something to me.
It gives me hope. It gives me great hope.
It seems like one of the big themes of this campaign is various types of subsidies for middle-income New Zealanders. Arguably, the Green Party version of that is solar panels for homeowners. Why do you think that homeowners need healthy home upgrades, solar panels, to be partly paid for by the government? Do these things not stack up on their own? Why not leave them to do it on their own?
Well, clearly, if government gets involved, we'll see a lot more uptake, a lot faster, and there's social and economic benefits from that and environmental benefits. So, the whole point of government intervention is to resolve where there's a market failure. Climate change is a market failure. People having asthma and other respiratory problems from living in cold, unhealthy housing is a market failure. So I think it makes absolute sense for the government to provide both grants and low-interest loans to accelerate the uptake of retrofits, installations, swapping out gas appliances for electric and solar panels. And the benefit of that is it immediately lowers people's power bills. It gets those health benefits. We know from the home insulation program that the Greens spearheaded back in 2008, carried through under National in a restricted way, not as big as what we originally envisaged, but then under Labour as well. Obviously, if the Greens get in, we can go much bigger. But that program was proven. Right now, we need to get to 100% electric, and solar is a great way to do that. Helps reduce people's power bills, which kind of reduces the market power that the big energy companies are wielding at the moment because they haven't been fast enough to build large-scale renewables. That's kept electricity prices higher. and they've been, doing quite well. So I think it's a way to kind of go directly to the problem.
And you don't think it matters that some of the households getting that support will be relatively well-off homeowners?
Well, it's not just for homeowners, because we also have an extensive policy around renters, including a warrant of fitness for rental properties, caps on rents, and those higher standards, so the landlords will be able to access these as well. So renters can very well benefit from this policy, and we expect them to. So the truth is we need to pull all the levers really fast to address the huge market failure that we have when it comes to climate change and some of our inequality and health problems. And I think if you look at all our policies combined, that really starts to make a big difference. And I think the analysis about who benefits in an individual way is sort of wrong-headed, and that's something that distracts from the reality that we are all in this together. We have to solve this problem together. And, like the clean car discount, it doesn't matter who's driving the EVs. The fact that there's more EVs or low emissions vehicles on the road is good for everyone. And it's fair that people importing new polluting vehicles contribute to the cost of subsidizing the lower emissions vehicles.
And it seems like the clean car rebate really has worked. It does seem to have incentivized
massively,
people to buy. Yeah.
Yes. And I knew it would. And I knew it would be popular, because that's what's worked everywhere else.
Yeah.
All you have to do is look overseas and say, when you bring in these sorts of policies, they work, they're effective. Yes, the people driving the EVs benefit, but actually we all benefit because there's cleaner air, lower carbon emissions, and actually people see that is fair. And the polling shows that even a majority of National Party voters support the fee on polluting vehicles, which I think is really important.
So you think maybe there's a lot of households out there that maybe would install solar but need a bit of a nudge, need a push?
Well, and it's not just a push. It's like there's barriers. There are financial barriers, especially right now when people are having trouble with the high cost of living. That is precisely when the government can step in and offer some financial support and carrots. And in the case of landlords, a little bit of a, stick as well, which is you actually, if you're going to make money off renting out housing, it needs to be healthy and not making your tenants sick. And then we also need some way for tenants' power bills to come down as well. And so that it just helps address all of that.
Yeah.
So this is what I love about green policy, is it's just so win-win-win, which is why it's frustrating that, that we haven't been able to do more up until now.
Yeah. Let's talk about the rent caps or the rent policy. It seems like what's landed in the manifesto is no more than 3%
a
year.
And you can't just kick out tenants and get a new tenancy and hike it up.
Yeah.
Now, I would say we've had persistently high rents for a while, so I don't see any risk here really in terms of impact on supply. I think the evidence on different approaches to rent controls is mixed, and you have to look at the whole suite of policy interventions together. Yes, there may be examples of places where rent controls haven't worked well, but that's because they don't have the other policies that we're proposing, which is a big push on public supply. I think we have to have caps. I mean, there is also evidence that rent controls work well in terms of limiting the growth in rents, and that's a major contributor to inflation and a high cost of living. So the argument seems to be, well, if you slow the growth in rents, somehow that will mean you'll get less private supply. We have other constraints on private supply right now that need to be addressed differently. I don't believe rents are a constraint on private supply. I don't believe limiting the growth in prices from now is a constraint, and particularly when we dial up the public housing, whether that's council, Kāinga Ora, or community housing providers. When we dial that up, that can address the supply issues.
The argument from a market perspective, though, would be either your supply side reform works and you don't need the caps, or the caps.
Well, the supply side reform doesn't work overnight. It takes time, and in the interim, rents are too high, and you have to take action. So that's why I think it's really important that. And most countries, lots and lots of countries in the world have the form of rent controls that we are proposing, which is it's not just like a freeze or a, like you get the same, you get into an apartment and you've got that rent 20 years later. It's more like limiting the rate of growth of rents so that it doesn't outstrip everything else and contribute to inflation, which then, by the way, if you have high inflation because you have high rents, and then that leads to the Reserve Bank, hiking interest rates, well, that's a problem for supply as well. So, I do think that there's a really strong case for us intervening in this place and time in Aotearoa. And I find a lot of the critique to be very high level and just sort of like, oh, this sort of thing never works, and not a really nuanced discussion of, well, what is the evidence and what sort of policies do work and what is the ultimate goal that we're trying to achieve as a society. Should housing be a market, or should it be a human right?
That was my very next question.
Yeah.
So I guess, does the Green Party believe the market should be providing housing? Or is that going to, over time, in your vision of the future, become the government's job?
Well, I think there will always be a job for the government to supply to some people, right? I mean, the market, if you have a free market for housing, it will never supply to, say, the bottom 10, 20% of people. And that's a problem for society because it costs you more in the long run. So, I'm not... If you look at countries like Sweden doesn't have, like, state housing per se, but all of their home builders are publicly owned and often consortiums between the city and the state. So, there's different ways to do it. But I do see an essential role for government, whether that's council or central government, or through community housing providers, to facilitate an increase in supply in housing, particularly when you get a downturn in building.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it looks like it might occur, and it seems crazy to me that a government would allow it to occur at this particular moment.
Yeah, exactly. And in 2008-9, when National first got in, that was the time to do counter-cyclical building, and they didn't because it was sort of against their ideology or whatever. But like a whole bunch of builders lost their ability. There wasn't house building, but then immigration ramped right up towards the second half of that term, and that's what's put so much pressure on our housing supply right now. And when Labour got in and tried to do Kiwi builds, that was like the height of the market, so it kind of wasn't the best time for a policy like that to work. They should have been focused more, I think, on catching up on state houses faster. And maybe it took some time to build up capability and capacity in the state house provision. But
do you agree, though, that if you cap rental increases at 3%, but the cost of providing a rental is more than 3% each year, despite best efforts, the effect over time is that government will have to provide housing at a cost to the government, and the market will stop doing so. And over time, the effect of that would be that basically the public sector would have to take over the supply of housing.
No, I don't think that's necessarily the case. And so the thing is that we've had an incentive to invest in rental properties for capital gains. You haven't, and so that hasn't been great for first home buyers either.
Yeah.
And also, they aren't building new houses. They're often investors competing with first home buyers for the existing supply. So from my point of view, yeah, maybe the state is going to keep... I think there's a really important role for the state to provide homes, and maybe more of that through local government or community because of the savings everywhere else in society. And if it's the case that, but we've got a huge amount of people building to rent. Long-term Simplicity Living, for example, is doing
I guess
long-term build to
I'm worried that it would
rent.
be discouraged if rent increases were discouraged. But if you build a bunch of supply, then rents are going to crash anyway. So I don't understand the people who are like, oh, well, we should just build lots of supply and then crash house prices and crash rents, because then it's like, in a way, capping the rate of growth and having consistent engagement and building new supply just smooths everything out and makes things more certain for people. But I don't believe that we should be looking at investment property as a way for individuals to get rich, because as a society, it's not a way for everyone to benefit, and will make us poorer and has made us poorer in the medium term. I think that's a fair assessment. I'm just not sure that rent controls are the way to go, but there it is.
But I think if we don't have rent controls, then we have this continual pressure on inflation, and you have people who are So, I just think as a stopgap right now, they're absolutely necessary.
I guess it feels to me like giving up in some ways. We should be able to provide affordable housing. The market should be able to, policy settings should be able to, zoning rules should be able to, and you shouldn't need the cap. That's kind of the thinking. And it feels like the cap is an admission.
But it's pretty obvious that we do need it because governments over the last few decades haven't done what they needed to do in terms of supply. So I do think we need them right now. And I don't think there's very robust, informed arguments against them. To me, it just feels like it's just a red flag. I don't know. It's something that people wave their arms around about a lot, but I don't feel that when you dig into it and say, what's the problem with the particular way we've proposed it, the particular suite of other policies we have, is this really a problem? I don't think it is.
Okay. If there is a bump in the polls, the undecided swing to the left, there still wouldn't be an electoral mandate for a wealth tax, which underpins a lot of your policies. Would you still go into coalition negotiations saying we want a wealth tax?
Well, ultimately, it's up to the party, but we've made it really clear that if people want a wealth tax or systemic reform of the tax system, they should party vote Green and give their vote to the Greens to give us that electoral mandate. And also, we've seen subsequent many polls showing that a majority of New Zealanders, no matter which party they're voting for, actually do support a capital gains tax, a wealth tax, even excess profits tax.
That was a surprise.
Rent controls. And so I actually think there is a mandate out there, and the role of leaders is to lead and do the right thing based on evidence. And when you know that a majority of the people in your society are going to be better off as a result of a policy, I think we have a responsibility to try and negotiate the best outcome we can get. And I think that, like the clean car discount, I don't know if, people might have had skepticism about that beforehand, but we did it because the evidence said it was the right thing to do, and it's been very successful, more successful than we even modeled, and it's turned out to be popular. And so I think that would be true with tax reform as well.
You'd feel happy voting for a wealth tax even if, only 17% of votes cast were in favour of a party that supported a wealth tax?
Well, the really puzzling thing to me is that 50% of National and ACT Party voters support a wealth tax or a capital gains tax. Right. So I don't know that people are voting on policy, So I think that when you, and even if a majority of New Zealanders didn't support it, and I think a majority do, we do have a responsibility to do the right thing. We are elected as representatives to use the power and the mandate we have to get the best possible outcomes. And I feel really confident the country would be better off as a result.
Do you think next election the left bloc needs to reach some sort of consensus on tax before going into the campaign? Because it feels like, Labour have made it a bottom line. We won't do wealth tax or capital gains tax. Green don't do bottom lines, but it's clear that it's key to your policy platforms. You're sort of in a position where the left bloc actually doesn't have a consensus on that issue. And if you were to both make it a bottom line, just wouldn't be able to form government anymore.
But, I don't know. It seems like ACT and National have different policies too, and New Zealand First, and we're not in the same party, so we have to have a point of difference, I guess. And I wouldn't complain if the Labour Party adopted all of our policy, if they actually implemented it. The problem with them is that they pick up our policy when they see it's popular, and then they fail to implement it and rule it out, which is really frustrating, which is why people should vote Green, of course, if they actually want to see these changes. But I think especially right now, it's like we can't deliver on the other things that we're promising unless we raise additional revenue. Mm-hmm. And I don't think the other parties, any of them, are credible, except maybe Te Pāti Māori, because they all keep promising investment in infrastructure and public services and better hospitals, and most of them are proposing to either reduce revenue or leave it the same, or raise revenue in a highly unlikely way, like National saying they're going to raise $700 million from a foreign buyers tax a year. That seems unlikely. Yeah, so the other parties just don't seem credible to me, and I'm really proud, and I guess this is why I'm in the Green Party and why I'm really still in the Green Party after all these years as a politician, is I really think we've been responsible in putting together a package that shows how we can address all of these different concerns people have and how we can do it in a fair way.
It's amazing how many former party leaders, once they leave politics, come out in favour of things like a capital gains tax. My favourite is Jim Bolger, former National Party Prime Minister. He'll be on RNZ all the time saying, we need more taxes. It does surprise me, but it seems like when you're in politics, you can't touch it. If you say you'll raise taxes, people won't vote for you.
Well, I think that's a misconception.
Okay.
I think they got that wrong, and clearly the people are voting for the Greens, and more people than ever. And it's the same, as I said, with the clean car discount. Yeah, we introduced a fee on polluting vehicles, and I think while a few parties have tried to attack that concept, most people think it's fair, and so you can do it because people can see the benefit, which is a 20% reduction almost in the average emissions from new vehicles being imported to New Zealand over a year, which is a huge increase in the pace of positive change.
Do you think that some voters are leaving Labour to vote for the Greens because of tax reform, and that's partly why Labour's perhaps not doing quite so well in the polls as some might expect?
I don't know if I should speculate about what people's motivations are, but yes, just welcoming more people voting for the Greens, I think that's a really good thing, and it will give us more power and ability to campaign on and negotiate for these changes. Frankly, I don't understand why the Greens aren't on 30 or 40%, given how popular our policies are, but maybe one day we will be.
Let me ask you a different question. Do you think anyone's voting for the Green Party purely for the tax cut?
I think most people are probably voting for the Greens because they can see that we have a coherent vision, positive vision about how we can do things better and in a different way that looks after both people and the planet. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I asked because you are offering tax cuts, but I never hear anyone talk about it. No one ever says to me, "Oh, I love the Greens. I'm going to get that tax cut." They do say that about the National Party, and I find that quite interesting.
I think that people's most strong motivations, we have some research around this, are their intrinsic values. And I think most people, the vast majority of people, care about nature, they care about their neighbors, they want to live in a more equitable society, and that's what the Greens are pitching in our campaign, is not self-interest. It's we're all in this together and we can live in a better world, and we can build that world together. Whereas clearly the National Party and many of the other parties are taking that more individualistic thing. What do I personally get out of it? But, I think most people will be better off with the Greens policies, but really what's motivating them is because they want to be part of something bigger than themselves as well.
Yeah, it's quite admirable on behalf of your voters. You have a fiscal plan. It's been independently scrutinised. You raise more revenue, so you can pay for more stuff. But you do it does lift debt levels very slightly. It's relatively marginal, but it's slightly higher. Other parties are quite worried about debt. Do you think we have too much debt? What are our optimal debt levels? Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I don't think that we have too much debt, depending on what we're investing in. Mm-hmm. So I think most of the countries that we compare ourselves to have higher levels of debt compared to GDP, and given that we have long-term investments we need to make to tackle the climate crisis, but also to deal with decades of underinvestment in infrastructure, we will have to take on some more debt, but that's okay because we'll be reducing costs for people in different places, and so then it'll make it easier to pay it off. Over time. But also, a country is not a household or a business, and we shouldn't be running balance sheets like one. Because, it's not – government's there to make up for where the market has failed, and it's also there for kind of collective good, things that don't deliver a commercial return. And so it is really important for government – if we have – people who are homeless, children who are growing up in poverty, an infrastructure crisis that means, our pipes are breaking everywhere, we're leaking sewage out into the marine reserve, et cetera, then we have an environmental social deficit, and it makes sense to focus on fixing that, because ultimately if we don't have a healthy environment and healthy people, we're not going to have a really functional economy.
Yeah. There's if you have room on the balance sheet but a deficit in infrastructure,
yes,
you really
yeah. And the way that we look at it is slightly off as well, because there's investments we can make in people that will help other people, but that doesn't count as an asset. So or education early. So there's some things.
Healthcare infrastructure.
Yeah, there is. So it's we count roads as an asset, as if we could value them and sell the state highway network tomorrow.
Because we can toll them, right?
Well, I mean, if we did that, we'd be affecting people's cost of living and their ability to get around. So the idea that we could just sell off our road network and be better off as a country is quite wrong-headed. And the idea that, investing in people to help them through, illness or sickness or get kids out of poverty, to make those connections, it will mean a higher cost in terms of our, the payroll for the public sector, potentially. But in the end, if we're better off as a society and more productive, then that's an investment that's worth making. And I don't think the well-being budget has got there in terms of understanding the opportunities and being able to weigh up different uses of public money to get the best outcome for our people in the medium and long term.
Interesting. Okay, a couple of fun questions to finish. What is your favourite policy put forward by one of the opposing parties? Not that you would form coalition with. That's cheating.
Oh, okay. So it can't be Labour to Party Maori.
No. Be anyone else, though. Go crazy. I mean,
they're not.
Can't think of a single one.
They're not all bad. Hey. I mean, TOP's got some good policies, but, I don't know if they count because they're just sort of like green.
What about ACT's pet bond for renters? You can have a pet if you pay a bond.
I don't like that.
You don't like that?
No, I don't like that.
What if renters want pets, though?
We just think renters should be able to have pets. Both full stop. Yeah, I don't know about the bond aspect. I could tell you lots of policies I don't like.
I'm sure you could.
Right. Okay, no, there's got to be one. Hold on, let me think. Let me think about it. National did something that was halfway okay, right?
Electrify New Zealand?
Look, I see the problem with that is, okay, great. You're going to double electrification, renewable electricity generation, supposedly. But they haven't done anything to actually accelerate or maintain the level at which we're replacing the fleet with cleaner vehicles. Yes, we need more vehicle chargers publicly provided. Mm-hmm. That's true. I'm okay with that.
Okay, there's one. Okay. When you look back at your life so far, what is one thing you wish you had spent more money on and one thing you wish you had spent less money on?
Oh, jeez. Well, we probably should have spent more money on, going to the gym. No. I mean, one of the things, what if I said something I didn't think I would be comfortable spending so much money on is my bike, current bike. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's more money than I thought I would more money than I ever have spent on a car.
Right.
But it turned out to be the best decision I ever made. I've been using it for 2 years, mm-hmm. and it's in a wonderful state. It's so reliable. It's so maneuverable. It's so handy. It's a joy to ride. My electric bike, Reeser and Muller, load 75. It carries the children mm-hmm. under a rain cover. It carries all my gear. Is
it one of those ones like a bike equivalent of a bus?
Yeah, it looks big, but I can go right between the cars at the lights and get up to the front. So that's how much I'm carrying as much goods as your average car, at least, and more passengers. But I'm taking up way less space. Almost no maintenance costs, no running costs, and it's just joyful. It's wonderful to use a machine that operates so well.
Looks too expensive, but it's a good investment.
Yeah, no, it was an amazing investment.
I've looked at the electric bike costs. I've been like, I'll buy an electric bike, and I look at the price. I'm like, no, I can buy an entire car. Why are electric bikes so expensive? What's going on?
Oh, it is a really great machine, but I got to say, you got to look at the whole of life costs. Way lower than a car. Okay, takes up less space. And it's more fun, and you never have a parking problem, really. I mean, it's so much easier to get into and out of the shops, when you just park it right up front and jump in, jump out. Yeah, it's way better than a car. And, doesn't depreciate as fast either.
Okay, to finish, Greens get into government, coalition, whatever, doesn't matter who else is there. What's the first thing people would notice, that the improvement in their lives they would notice after 6 months, a year of a Green government? What's the thing they'll notice?
Oh, well, I definitely think that people would start to notice immediate relief on cost of living if we were able to implement our changes on tax and guaranteed minimum income, because 95% of New Zealanders would be financially better off under the Greens' tax proposals, and the tiny percentage that are paying more would also live in a country where we had better infrastructure and better public services. Although that will take some time. I have to say, you probably can't achieve that straight away, but we could reduce the cost of public transport overnight, and we could probably increase the frequency of services within 6 months to a year, of bus services, and most other infrastructure takes longer, and we could stop the price of rents going up so fast. So it'd be really good for renters.
All right. Julie Anne Genter, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it a lot.